Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to the third evening of Hannah's Bookica. Today I want to do yet another tag, although I promise that the next couple of videos will not be tags, despite the fact that I still have several on my docket to do at some point. This particular tag celebrates two things. First, Jólabókaflóð, the wonderful Icelandic tradition of giving books on Christmas Eve, and second, the literary festival, named after the tradition and put together by Margaret Pinard and another indie author, Elle Mitchell, to highlight small presses and indie authors. I'll leave a link in the description box to the schedule of online events. It looks fantastic. The Jólabókaflóð tag was created by Margaret Pinard, and Roz at Scallywdaddling About the Books was kind enough to tag me. I'll link to both of their channels below. Let's get right to the prompts. Question 1. The name. What is an unpronounceable or difficult to pronounce word you love? Perhaps this isn't a very festive word, but one of my longtime favorite words that isn't immediately obvious how to pronounce is hegemony, and its adjective hegemonic. If you're unfamiliar with the word, it basically means dominance, sometimes of one country over another, and sometimes of one social group over another. In my world of social history, cultural hegemony is the particular sort of dominance that's discussed the most. That's when one society or group gains power by portraying their culture as inherently superior, or perhaps even just more normal than another group's cultural traditions. Social historians are often really interested in breaking down how this kind of power works to make these assumptions something we can critique as a way particular groups gain not only cultural but economic and political power. Hegemony is not a hard word to say once you get it in your head, but especially for people who often only know the word from reading, we often stumble over it. And since I'm talking about knowing words from reading, my mother used to talk about her brilliant and very bookish English major college friend who told her that she was muzzled by a particular teacher. My mother was puzzled. She didn't know the word. What did it mean? Perplexed. Led astray. How do you spell it? Of course, my mother's smart friend knew of the word pronounced misled, but somehow in print it looked like new vocabulary, and she picked it up and added this useful word to her daily speech. The reason I know this story is because every time I adopted a new word from my reading, I managed to butcher the pronunciation and got reminded that I had been misled once again. Question 2. The tradition. What is a new-to-you tradition or retelling of one that you love? For the last 4 or 5 years, my family has been making homemade Pop-Tarts on Thanksgiving morning. We're not people who have Pop-Tarts in the house normally, so this is kind of a big thing. Sometimes we make them with a dough, kind of like you'd use for a pie crust. But recently we've used store-bought puff pastry, which is not necessarily authentic, that's what you're after, but it is certainly delicious. For the last 2 years, we've filled our Pop-Tarts with 2 Thanksgiving-ish fillings, pumpkin butter in some and cranberry sauce in the others. While we're eating them next to strong coffee, we often start the books we've picked out to read over the long weekend. I think this tradition will last. The third question, the adaptation. What is an adaptation of something you love that was made even better or equal? I've talked recently about my fondness for both the book and the film adaptation of 84 Charing Cross Road, so I'll choose a different one today. I really love the film adaptation of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, starring Gregory Peck, who makes a perfect Atticus. The novel is one I've loved since I was young, but the movie is just as wonderful. I do miss one particular favorite scene from the novel, when Scout is required to go read aloud to her elderly neighbor, who's trying to kick a morphine addiction before she dies. It's a really meaningful scene, and while it isn't essential to the plot, and it makes sense to excise it from the film, I love how it creates echoes about both honesty and strength throughout the book. Question 4. The mood. What is the coziest book you've read or expect to read this winter? I have 2 books on my shelf that I really want to read in late December that are a bit cozy, sort of. One is Amor Towles' A Gentleman in Moscow, and the other is Francesca Wade's Square Haunting. I mentioned them yesterday, or maybe the day before, so I'll mention a couple I hope to get to perhaps in January. 84 Charing Cross Road on New Year's Day, and Elizabeth Gaskell's Cranford, a book I didn't love when I read it years ago, even though it sounds absolutely perfect for my style. So I'm going to try again and hope my increased grayness, see yesterday's video, will help me through. The 5th question, the discovery. Who is a new author you've discovered this year that you love? I'll name 2. Although I've read a lot of Virginia Woolf's nonfiction over the last several decades, I read a novel by her for the first time this year. To the Lighthouse was the one I chose. I really loved it and plan to read more Woolf in 2021. The other is a nonfiction author, Maggie Doherty, who wrote The Equivalents, about a cohort of women who participated in the early years of the Radcliffe Institute for Independent Study. I love how Doherty is able to appreciate how creative and innovative the work of the Institute was, and yet at the same time make it quite clear that the participants were often limited in their ideas about race and class and sexuality, etc. Doherty doesn't skewer them or dismiss their successes and their brilliance. Instead, she gives a generous but honest appraisal of how and why the women made the statements and decisions they did. I can't wait to see more work from this author. The next prompt, the setting. What is the deepest, darkest setting you've read about? Since I mentioned Robert Macfarlane yesterday, I'll name his book Underland, a very literal reading of the question. To be fair, Macfarlane is writing about both a literal and mythological kind of underworld, and he goes deep, not just into the earth, but deep into time, and deep into human imagination, where he questions the darkness that happens not only in the earth, but in humanity as we face an ecological disaster. Question number 7, The Hot Cocoa. What is a book that comforted you during a long night, literal or metaphorical? During a very frightening time, I picked up a book that isn't a comforting book per se, but it very much helped me through that time. That book is Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon. I'll read you a section from Alice Walker's beautiful introduction, with a couple of phrases removed. Here is the medicine, that though the heart is breaking, happiness can exist in a moment also. And because the moment in which we live is all the time there really is, we can keep going. It may be true, and often is, that every person we hold dear is taken from us. Still, from moment to moment, we watch our beans and our watermelons grow. We plant, we hoe, we harvest. We share with neighbors. Life, inexhaustible, goes on. And we do too, carrying our wounds and our medicines as we go. Ours is an amazing, a spectacular journey. Perhaps our planet is for learning to appreciate the extraordinary wonder of life that surrounds even our suffering, and to say yes, if through the thickest of tears. Question 8, The Gift. What is an indie book you'll be giving this winter season? I just want to do a small shout out to a category of publisher that isn't exactly indie, but has some of the same features, and that's university presses. Although there are some relatively large and relatively successful university presses, Harvard or Oxford, for example, even they often take big risks on books that they know won't sell well, but are important to put in print. Many university presses are quite small and quite respected in particular academic fields. UNC Press, which published my book, is one of the best Southern history and culture presses there is. Duke University Press publishes an array of fantastic books on social theory and the like, one of the top presses in the country for that basic topic. But even these highly respected but small university presses are always struggling. So, absolutely support indie presses and indie authors, and also support some university presses if they're putting out books that matter to you. Okay, thank you, Margaret, for the excellent tag and for putting together what sounds like a fascinating festival. And thanks, Roz, for tagging me. I'd like to tag a few booktubers who might have some other interesting traditions to share with us. I'll tag Josh at Josh's Book Voyage, Berna at Berna's Bookish Adventures, Katya Weinhardt, Una and Crypto at the Codex Cantina, and Jasna at Jasna's Bookscapades. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Thanks to all of you for joining me here today on Hannah's Books. See you tomorrow for the fourth night of Bookaka.